Hi, I'm Hugh and welcome to my channel for photojournalism students. This is my second online lecture, if you want to call it that, something to that effect. Once again, I apologize for a lack of polish. I'm doing this all in one take. The aim being education during this coronavirus crisis and not necessarily being perfectly slick. So, as I say, bear with me. Today I wanted to talk a bit about some laws that a photojournalist should always keep in mind. These laws really fall into, I can say, three big groups. The first is defamation law, the second privacy law, and also I wanted to talk about certain criminal laws that might be relevant to your work. The first thing is defamation law. Every journalist needs to be aware, whether they're a photojournalist, a writer of course, even a graphic designer to some extent, that a person has a right to his or her good name. You have a right, all other things being equal, to have a good reputation, for people to not muddy your name in public. The phrase "a right to his good name" actually comes from the Irish constitution. The Namibian constitution talks about a right to human dignity, which has many aspects, but I think also having a right to be respected is also, to have a good name is also part of that right. And defamation law protects that right. It protects you against false statements. It protects you against statements that might make people see you as not a good person, as not trustworthy, as not worthy of doing business with, for example, of not worthy of having a relationship with or employing. So, a person can sue you for defamation if you've published a statement or a picture or anything of that sort that essentially makes them look bad, that attacks their right to a good name. The defense to a charge of defamation is generally two things. One, truth, and secondly, that what you did was in the public interest. So you can always say, it's true. I have evidence that this politician is corrupt. And you can say it's in the public interest. Not interesting to the public, but for the public good. It's for the public good that we expose this politician because he is corrupt. The public benefits from it. As a photojournalist, you might not see how this applies to you. One thing is that photographs are often used as evidence of this wrongdoing. So photo manipulation, you obviously have to be very careful of. Manipulate a picture showing some kind of wrongdoing, add something here on Photoshop to make it look a bit more dramatic. That photo might no longer be any good to serve you in a defamation suit or anything like that. If you published a manipulated photo showing wrongdoing, even slightly manipulated, it might put you in legal hot water. So that's why a lot of publications don't manipulate hard news photos. A photo like war journalism, a photo of a police raid, photos taken outside courts, that kind of thing. They wouldn't really manipulate that at all on Photoshop, beyond maybe sort of color correction, that sort of thing, contrast and so on. Even cropping you have to be careful with if that crop changes the meaning of the picture. If the picture looks, if someone were to interpret that picture differently after cropping, then it could be a problem. So be aware of that. Another key area where often photojournalists fall foul of the law is privacy law. As far as the law is concerned, if I am in a private space, for example, in my home, in my yard, on my private property, on a business property that I happen to own or that someone else happens to own. You need permission of the person who owns the property to take a picture there. So that also applies to a lot of things. It could be considered an invasion of privacy, for example, if I set up my camera on a hill somewhere overlooking your yard and I take a picture of you meeting someone or other in your yard and I then publish it. I then defend myself if that came to court by once again arguing about public interest. You know, maybe I'm a politician meeting some businessmen who I have a corrupt relationship with. Maybe I publicly stated that I never met those people and you now have evidence. So you then argue, look, this might be an invasion of privacy, but it is for a specific public purpose to expose wrongdoing. Be careful with that. Over the last few decades, courts have been more and more, I can say more and more draconian in terms of enforcing people's right to privacy. One thing that generally makes a difference is a person a public figure? You know, it's an often stated example that if I'm the average Joe and I'm cheating on my wife, I'm having an affair, okay, it might be none of the public's business to take photographs that prove it and then publish it. On the other hand, if I'm a politician, maybe one of those politicians who likes to talk about, public morals and family values and all that stuff, and then I'm having an affair, maybe that does speak to my moral ability to lead. So there are interesting dynamics at foot or at play. As a independent photojournalist, I'd be very careful of invading people's privacy. Rather err on the side of caution, as they say. There are many aspects of criminal law that you need to bear in mind as a photographer and as a journalist. One of those is an accused person's right to be presumed innocent before the law until possibly found guilty. So definitely you have to be aware, for example, in how you write headlines and how you write captions. You have to be aware that you're not prejudicing the person's trial. You have to make sure that you're not saying for damn sure the person is guilty. So often in, for example, captions and headlines, publications will use the word alleged. It is alleged that Hugh Ellis stole a bike. You don't have to use that word. You could say things like Hugh Ellis is accused of stealing a bicycle. Police allege that Hugh stole a bicycle on Tuesday morning. Hugh Ellis's trial for bicycle theft continues. You can say things like that. Another thing to be very cognizant of is how you deal with children. So children, people under 18 years old, you shouldn't publish their photo without parents' or guardians' consent. Now those parents or guardians could be people like, people like a school principal, for example, people acting in the role of a parent. It could be, someone like the manager or director of a children's home, for example. But ideally you will want to get some kind of permission, either verbally but at least you'll want to protect yourself by getting permission from some kind of caretaker or caregiver of children you take pictures of. Another key thing relates to rape. Unless a survivor of rape consents, you as a media person can't reveal their name. That's also true of revealing their name indirectly, for example, by taking a picture of them, also by saying, she's the sister of so and so or the cousin of so and so. If they consent, if they come to you as a reporter and say, "Listen, I'm not gonna let this bastard intimidate me. I want to tell my story," then that's fine. But if not, you should make sure you never reveal the name of a rape survivor. Often there's so much stigma still in this day and age, unfortunately, associated with rape and rape victims and that sort of thing. It's just really better not to. Often, as a photojournalist, a person might want to tell their story anonymously. Definitely that anonymity should be respected by journalists of all stripes. Definitely. As a photographer, you can think of ways, for example, taking a picture of them in silhouette, or a picture of their hands, or picture, over their shoulder while they're talking to a reporter. There are lots of ways you can still make pictorial content without necessarily revealing someone's identity against their will. Worth bearing in mind that a child victim of rape should never be identified. Also, a child accused of a crime should not be identified. The idea behind this is really just giving people a chance, so that I'm not known. If I steal a bicycle when I'm 12, I'm not known throughout my entire life. When I want to stand for president at 50, then someone must point out, but he stole a bicycle when he was 12. How can you trust him? So I don't think it's unreasonable that we give juvenile offenders, as they're called, a chance by not identifying them. You'll see sometimes in photographs they do that non-identification by putting kind of a, something like a bar, like a black bar over people's eyes or something like that, or sort of blurring out their face. That's got to be done well. Sometimes people are still recognizable with that. So make sure you, if you're a photographer, make sure you supervise a graphic designer actually doing any of that work. So, one other thing which has been in the news which might be important to note, is photography of military personnel. It's a grey area in law, because in terms of the Namibian Defence Force Act, there are prohibitions on, for example, photographing military bases. There are restrictions on photographing troops on active operations. Whether that applies to troops when they are in effect acting as police officers is a very grey area. The Namibian Defence Force Act makes it clear that when troops are doing that, the Namibian Police Act applies, and the Police Act doesn't say anything about prohibiting photography of police officers. However, it's a very grey area. And particularly as a young photojournalist and as an independent photojournalist, I'd be very cautious indeed of taking pictures of army officers when they're on active operations, particularly if you don't have a large corporation with their lawyers to back you up. Just something to bear in mind. So that's my presentation about laws that a photojournalist should be aware of. Bear in mind that laws are not everything. When it comes to operating as a moral practitioner, laws really only spare out the bare minimum. I mean, of course, you shouldn't be identifying rape victims without their consent. Of course, you shouldn't be invading someone's privacy unless they're a public figure, or unless even then you need a really convincing reason for doing so. generally you shouldn't be violating people's rights as a journalist. A journalist's job is to protect people's rights. But also laws, as I say, laws spell out the bare minimum. There are also questions of ethics, Okay, I might be allowed to do this thing, but bearing in mind what I know about the profession, what I know about justice, my own ideas of right and wrong, what I know about my culture and my society, all that comes into play as well. So a good journalist obeys the law as far as is possible, but a good journalist also thinks ethically. And whereas law is often cut and dried and black and white, you either can do X or you can't. With ethics, there are a lot more grey areas. With ethics, you have to weigh the pros and cons, the disadvantages and advantages of doing X or Y, and it often gets a lot more complicated. So as things go forward, we will also have a discussion not only about laws but about ethics. For now, I hope you enjoyed my lesson. I hope we can have a discussion in the comments and elsewhere. And for now, thank you for listening and goodbye.